Hello everyone, my name is Jay. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to be a first-year medical student starting in July, and after taking the MCAT 3 times, I figured I would share some tips with you. If you want to hear more about my MCAT story and how I had to take the MCAT 3 times, then you can find the link in the description below. Otherwise, I wanted to share with you today 5 tips for the MCAT and things I wish I knew before I took it. Let's get started. So tip number 1, give yourself enough time. This means several things. So the first thing is, if you know you have a bunch of content to get through, don't cram it in this time span of, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks. Give yourself enough time. So let's say that you aren't working, you're not taking classes, then give yourself however much time. Let's say you need 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 10, 12 weeks, however many weeks you need to study or prepare for the MCAT. And if you are working and if you are still in classes, then spread that out longer. Maybe you need 6 months because you can't dedicate all day, every day to the MCAT. Just make sure that you make it manageable for yourself. However long you need, spread it out so that you do not burn out and that you pace yourself properly. Now, another thing that I recommend is that you take the MCAT 6 months, at least 6 months in advance to your application cycle. Now, for example, for me, I applied at the end of my junior year. So for example, if the AMCAS application opens on June 1st, and that is the first day that you can submit your application, you want to make sure that it is complete. So you want to make sure that you have your MCAT score well in advance to June 1st so that when you submit it, right, you have your full AMCAS application file, it's complete, it has all of the information, and schools can immediately start reviewing this. So that's a good thing because the earlier you apply, the more likely you are to get secondary applications, the more likely you are to get interviews, and the more likely you are to get an acceptance. So I say 6 months, but you can do even more in advance. But let's say that the MCAS opens in June. I recommend that you take the MCAT for the first time, at least if you were taking it for the first time, to take it probably over winter break. And the reason for this is 2 things, right? The first is that you will get your MCAT score 1 month after you take it. So if you take it in December or January, you will have it probably in February, and your application file with the MCAS will then be ready. Now, the second reason is if for some reason you don't score as well as you wanted to, then that means you have enough time now to enter a second study period and prepare and take the MCAT for a second time, still well in advance, and get that score in time for your AMCAS application cycle. So that's what I mean by give yourself enough time. Don't cram, and make sure that you have your exam score in advance so that you have it for your AMCAS application. I made a huge mistake and I took the I made a huge mistake and I took the MCAT in June after I had already submitted my application. And so then med schools had to wait for my score to come in, and that delayed things a little bit. The second tip that I have for you is to avoid resource overload. What I mean by this is I remember preparing to study for my MCAT, right? My first, second, and third. And I was extremely overloaded by the amount of resources there were. I know there's Princeton review books, there's online courses, there's Kaplan, there's Khan Academy, there's Anki flashcards, and so many resources out there that my brain was just scattered all over the place. I was trying to figure out which books I should use. I was trying to obtain all of these different books and resources and compiling them in PDFs and free resources online. And it was just so much time that I realized I was spending on picking the best resource and having all these resources that I was actually overloaded and stressed out. And instead of picking one resource and sticking to it and creating a study schedule based on that resource and just honing in on my study schedule, I was wasting all of this time trying to figure out what I should actually be using. So what ended up happening is I ended up picking the Princeton review books for all three of my study periods for all 3 of my MCATs. And the reason I did that was just because I was most familiar with Princeton Review. I had used it for high school when I was taking my AP exams. I liked the way it was laid out. I liked the text, the font. It was just something that I was familiar with. So in my opinion, please pick one resource. If you like Kaplan, go with Kaplan. If you like Princeton Review, go with that. But pick one and stick to it. To be completely honest, by the 3rd time around, when I was finally able to improve my MCAT score by 7 points, I had only stuck to the Princeton Review books, in addition to my, of course, online course that I was taking with Princeton Review. But I didn't use anything else. I didn't use any flashcards. I didn't use Khan Academy. I was just sticking to this one resource because all of these resources cover the MCAT content. They will cover what you need. It's just a matter of sticking to it and going with it. So that is my second tip for you. My third tip is to have a dedicated study period. So for both my first MCAT and my second MCAT, I did not have a dedicated study period. For my first MCAT, I was taking full-time courses at university. So I was at like 18 credits. And then in addition to that, I was working some part-time jobs. And in addition to that, I was spending time with my friends and doing extracurricular activities and shadowing. And somehow I thought that I would have time to study for the MCAT, which was absolutely not true. Same thing with my second MCAT. I ended up studying during the summer, but during that time, I was actually doing a shadowing program abroad. So part of the time I would be shadowing during the day for like, I don't know, the entire day. Then I would get home and I would be exhausted, so I wouldn't study. So I was just like picking up resources one week, kind of studying, and then putting them away the next week, and then coming back to them a few weeks later. So my advice to you is have a dedicated study period, right? By the third time around, I blocked off 12 full weeks. I dedicated all of my time to the MCAT. All of those 12 weeks, it was just MCAT. I wasn't working. I wasn't taking classes. I dedicated as much focused attention to studying as I could during those 12 weeks. And again, this is to make sure that the content is manageable, the review is manageable, I'm not burning out, I'm pacing myself. Just remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint. So make a schedule that you know that you can stick to for whatever amount of time you choose as your dedicated study period. And now I know that not everyone can take the time off to have 12 weeks of full-time study, but you can still create a schedule that works for you. If you're working, then maybe you just will expand those 12 weeks and turn them into 6 months. So every day after work, you're doing dedicated studying, or every day after your classes, you're doing dedicated studying. Just make sure that the study period is appropriate for your schedule. The next thing that I wish I knew was that maintaining a daily schedule is key. So once I figured out that I was going to dedicate those 12 weeks of study period to my MCAT, I then knew that I was going to be using the Princeton Review books for my content. So I created a week-to-week schedule. I looked at all of my Princeton Review books, the content of every book and all of the chapters in the books. And so I knew how many pages overall I needed to cover, how many chapters I needed to cover. And what I did with that is then I distributed that day by day. So over my 12 weeks, I gave myself accountable goals that I had to achieve every single day. So I would set myself to read maybe 1 or 2 chapters per day and do this many practice questions per day. And as long as I stuck to that schedule, it made it seem very manageable and very tangible. So I was doing small tasks every day, but it was getting me to my ultimate goal of covering all of the content by the end of the 12 weeks. So don't set super ambitious goals. If you know that you're going to burn out and not be able to read 300 pages a day or 10 chapters a day, don't set those goals. Set something that you know that you can achieve in the amount of time that is doable for you. So that's one thing when I refer to schedule is my week-to-week schedule. But then every single day, I had an hour-to-hour schedule. For those 12 weeks, I basically repeated the same thing every single day, except for my days off. I definitely had days off because that allows me not to burn out. And then sometimes if there was an emergency or something came up, then I would change my schedule. But otherwise, I knew that I would wake up every morning at the same time, and I wasn't super ambitious. I don't like waking up early. So I started around 9 or 10 o'clock, and my day would end a little bit later than somebody who would wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and start studying. But basically, I knew I would wake up at this time, I would eat at this time. I had 2 to 3 hours of study time to accomplish these tasks in those 2 to 3 hours. Then I would have lunch. Then I would have this study time. Then I would have some leisure time. Then I would go to bed at this time. So having that hour-to-hour schedule that I maintain daily really helped me to stay focused, stay disciplined, and keep doing the same thing over and over to make sure that I was getting through all of the content that I needed. And definitely I had breaks in there. I needed my breaks. I needed to have fun in between my study time. So maintain a schedule. The next thing that I would say is tip number 5, don't put off practice exams. So a lot of the time, and I'm super guilty of this, is that we feel like we don't know enough content yet to start taking practice exams. But the truth is that you, me, everybody, we will never feel 100% confident about covering the content. So what's more important is that we start taking practice exams early on and maintaining those practice exams over time. Now, part of the MCAT is content, but the other part is also time management, test-taking strategies, knowing the format, knowing when you get fatigued and how to avoid getting fatigued. It's a lot of tactics, and the only way we can really improve those things is by taking practice exams, and not just messing around and taking a practice exam here and there, but on a consistent schedule, making sure you're taking full length practice exams and making sure that you are simulating the real situation. So for example, my schedule, I had 12 weeks of study, and during those 12 weeks, I blocked off Saturdays as my full length exam days. And you can choose to take a full length exam every Saturday, or if you feel like that's too much, then take one every other week, right? So in my 12-week study period, if I do one every other week, then that gets me through 6 full length exams that I have done before my actual exam date. And the other thing that's important is going through the full length exam like you actually would on test day. This is super important because it gets you used to what the real day will look like. You start to build habits and start to become more efficient and not fatigue as much. The more you do it, the more you repeat the full length real simulation, you don't get fatigued like you would from the first exam versus like the 10th exam, right? And so what that means is wake up like you would on your actual exam day, whether that's 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock, wake up, eat the breakfast that you're going to eat, and start the exam at the time that the testing center would start that exam. Take the breaks like you would on actual test day, right? Whatever the allotted time is, take it. Don't take longer, because that's not what the real day will look like. Prepare the same snacks or lunch that you expect on having during your test day. For me, it was a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was something that I could quickly get, and then it would give me some glucose, a little bit of energy. I even had a Coke, I think, on test day. So make sure that you are engaging in the real simulation, because it will really get you used to what the schedule will look like, and you will feel more confident. Honestly, the more you're familiar with something, the more confident you will feel. So those are my 5 tips for you, and I want to leave you guys with a thought. Again, this is based on my personal experience. If you find it helpful, please think it through, reflect on it, and hopefully it helps somebody out there. But what I realized after taking the MCAT 3 times is that my past scores weren't a reflection of my intelligence, but rather a direct correlation to the study plans I built, the discipline I maintained, and the hard work I put in every day over the months. So if you're in a situation where you're taking the MCAT for the first time or second or third time, don't get discouraged. Thanks so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like. I have also posted my blog in the description if you want to read some more details about these tips. And I look forward to seeing you next time when I go into more detail about what my study schedule looked like and what my daily schedule looked like. See you guys next time.